Board. Okay, go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. So, hello, friends. Welcome to this 48th webinar on the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. That marks the 4th year running that we've been doing this webinar series. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheading Moria Federation Webinars, then Webinar Series in Progress. Previous episodes of this, The Secret Doctrine, and the Treatise on Cosmic Fire series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald in the webinar you wish to view. You can join any of these webinars on the homepage of Moria Federation in this panel up in the upper left-hand corner of the homepage. All righty. Last time we continued our study of Isis, the Virgin of the World, where we took a look at how the Masons, Jewish, and Mohammedan priests ritually reenact the 7 planetary circulations. MPH then continues with his detailed analysis of the elements found in a particular statue of Isis and the possible meanings of those elements, including a triple cornucopia found in her headdress and a small sailing ship with the spindle of a spinning wheel for its mast. We then considered Isis's connection to Neith, the weaver, who in Greek mythology became one of the 3 fates. MPH then considers Isis' connection with specific alchemical qualities, such as saltiness, acidity, and those qualities associated with the element mercury, relating them to the cycles of birth and death and life, birth, life, and death. He also considers those alchemical conditions that result from combinations of the elements, all very alchemical. We then took a look at the ideas of one of the last great alchemists, Dr. Sigismund Backstrom, who believed that he had discovered the Philosopher's Stone. And finally, we were introduced to the 7 stages of transforming lead into gold, the alchemical analogy for walking the initiatory path. And this takes us up to where we left off last time. So can we get a reader for the next passage in the book?
I'll start off.
Okay, great.
From the right breast of Isis protruded a bunch of grapes, and from the left an ear of corn or sheaf of wheat, golden in color. These indicate that nature is the source of nutrition for plant, animal, and human life, nourishing all things from herself. The golden color in the wheat, corn, indicates that in the sunlight or spiritual gold is concealed the first sperm of all life. On the girdles surrounding the upper part of the body of the statue appear a number of mysterious emblems. Girdle is joined together in front by 4 golden plates, the elements, placed in the form of a square. This signified that Isis, or nature, the first matter, alchemical terminology, was the essence of the 4 elements: life, light, heat, and force, which quintessence generated all things. Numerous stars are represented on this girdle, thereby indicating their influence in darkness as well as the influence of the sun in light. Isis is the virgin immortalized in the constellation of Virgo, where the world mother is placed with the serpent under her feet and a crown of stars on her head. In her arms, she carries a sheaf of grain and sometimes the young sun god.
Thank you, BL. Okay, in this first sentence, MPH restates Isis's identification with the three kingdoms of nature. We don't need to go back through that. Next, the golden color in the wheat, corn, indicates that in the sunlight or spiritual gold is concealed the first sperm of all life. MPH here equates wheat with the high spiritual stage of alchemical gold. All through this chapter, he's been weaving in and out of the alchemical emphasis of Isis. Wheat was considered to be sacred by the ancient Egyptians. In fact, they performed rituals and offerings with wheat to honor Osiris and ensure his rebirth. DK tells us that wheat is a gift from Venus. It's interesting that Isis is often depicted in tones of gold in contrast to Osiris's second ray blue, which stands opposite gold on the color wheel. We might ask whether the alternating bands that make up certain pharaohs' headdresses, like this burial mask of Tutankhamun, represent the noumenal and manifest reality personified by Osiris and Isis. Next, on the girdle surrounding the upper part of the body of the statue appear a number of mysterious emblems. The girdle is joined together in front by 4 golden plates, the elements, placed in the form of a square. This signified that Isis, or nature, the first matter, alchemical terminology, was the essence of the 4 elements, life, light, heat, and force, which quintessence generated all things. Okay, these essences are aspects of the alchemical prima materia, who is Isis. For she is the animating principle needed to generate the philosopher's stone from the 4 elements. Isis was associated with the pentagram and the number 5 in ancient Egypt, which was also associated with Sirius, Isis's starry abode. So you see her here. This is a very, very old piece, and it just literally shows her this trunk of a goddess, but with all the appendages in the form of 5-pointed stars. And you have the bull of Taurus associated with the star here. That was always the animal representation of Isis. And then here with the Sirius star above Isis's head. Next. Excuse me a moment. Okay, so let's go back here for a minute. So these right. Okay, next up, numerous stars are represented on this girdle, thereby indicating their influence in darkness as well as the influence of the sun in light. This refers to Isis in her universal aspect, for she not only represents the Prakriti, or substantive aspect of this solar system, but of all creation. She's really a universal goddess. Thus, she was said to give birth to the sun in one of the myths, because she is basically the form aspect and all universally, cosmically, as well as systemically. By the way, if you have any thoughts or questions at any time, please raise your hand. As you know, it's always more interesting to have some dialogue than me just lecturing at you for the whole hour and a half. Finally,
We have a hand raised.
great.
Go ahead, Yvonne.
You had mentioned that wheat was a gift from Venus. I just want to mention that honey is supposed to be a gift from Venus too.
Yeah, and it's also golden,
Yeah,
golden in color, interestingly, isn't it?
it
And Isis
goes on the bread.
say what?
It goes on the bread.
Yeah, there you go. Uh, and Isis and Venus are very much connected in that way. I mean, the goddess Venus and the planet have connections with Isis. You know, Isis is, in terms of her starry abode, is connected with Sirius, which is in turn connected with Venus through the number five. Venus tracks that 5 points when seen from Earth. You've probably all seen that. And the number 5 is very much connected with Sirius, considered the 5-pointed star. Okay, let's see here. Finally, Isis is the virgin immortalized in the constellation Virgo, where the world mother is placed with the serpent under her feet and a crown of stars on her head. In her arms, she carries a sheaf of grain and sometimes the young sun god. So the Chinese name for Virgo is SHE. Interestingly, in English, that spells she, but in Chinese, it means serpent. Very often that S sound in other languages, especially ancient language, are associated with the serpent, for good, obvious reasons, the hissing, right? Gerald Massey gives us some idea of the ancient origins of this goddess. Could we get a reader, please?
Yvonne, can you read that for us, please?
Sure,
Hold on just 1 second.
sure.
Maria says the representation of Isis here described as much parallel with Virgin in Christianity. Can you comment on this?
Yeah, it's they're very much connected and derivative. And actually, I have this in the webinar, but it's almost certain that the Virgin Mary and the Jesus with the child Jesus was taken from Isis suckling the young god Horus, who was their Christ. That was the Egyptian Christ, the solar deity, right? So you have the material aspect in both cases represented by either Mary or Isis. And that's, you could go further with that. There's, all the major goddesses of the ancient times, including this one, Semiramis, were aspects of Isis. Okay, reader, please.
First, she, Isis, was the abyss of birth represented by the dragon. Second, the goddess of the great bear. Third, the wateress with streaming breasts in the Hermenian zodiac. And lastly, she was portrayed as the Virgin Mother in the sign Virgo and the bringer forth in the sign of Pisces, where she is half fish and half human, and thus combines the two truths of water and breath in one image. Ishtar Belit, the genetrix in her dual character of Venus above and Venus below the horizon, was worshipped in the temples of Syria, as at Hierapolis, under the form of a statue with a golden dove on her head. One of her names there being Semiramis. Seleucian calls Semiramis the daughter of Derkito, Altergatus, whom he saw in Phoenicia as a woman with a tail of a fish, whereas at Hierapolis, she was woman all over. The fish denoted the element of water. The dove signified the soul of breath that was derived from the mother. The breath or spirit of life was first perceived in motherhood, and the two truths of the water and breath were assigned to the mother.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, the breath is really the highest, or it's a symbol for the highest aspect of the Isis concept, right? Because it's Isis that allows all of us to take a breath, right? Because without the whole matrix of the form aspect represented by this goddess, we could not incarnate. Therefore, we could not progress. We could not take a breath, so to speak, right? Okay. Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please?
Yes, Vivian, can you read that for us, please?
The statue of Isis was placed on a pedestal of dark stone, ornamented with ram's heads. Her feet trod upon a number of venomous reptiles. This indicates that nature has power to free from acidity or saltness all corrosives and to overcome all impurities from terrestrial corruption adhering to bodies. The ram's heads indicate that the most auspicious time for the generation of life is during the period when the sun passes through the sign of Aries. The serpents under her feet indicate that nature is inclined to preserve life and to heal disease by expelling impurities and corruption. In this sense, the axioms known to the ancient philosophers are verified, namely, nature contains nature. Nature rejoices in her own nature. Nature surmounts nature. Nature cannot be amended but in her own nature. Therefore, in contemplating the statue of Isis, we must not lose sight of the occult sense of its allegories. Otherwise, the Virgin remains an inexplicable enigma.
Thank you, Vivian. Okay, first, the statue of Isis was placed on a pedestal of dark stone ornamented with ram's heads. Her feet trod upon a number of venomous reptiles. This indicates that nature has power to free from acidity or saltness, all corrosives, and to overcome all impurities from terrestrial corruption adhering to bodies. So there are friezes, such as this one, that depict a young Horus called Horpakhered by the Egyptians and Harpocrates by the Greeks, standing on a pair of crocodiles, which symbolize the pairs of opposites. You can see here the analogy to this chart. You know, as son of Isis, you have this prima materia is the unity that stands on the fundamental pairs of opposites, which is the celestial salt and celestial nitre, or fixed and volatile. Harpocrates, as I said, is the son of Isis and thus stands above the pairs of opposites, as do his parents Osiris and Isis. But the serpents in friezes such as this, which in addition to Harpocrates depict Isis, Horus, and Thoth standing on coiled serpents, have a different meaning, that of cyclic time. So different meanings for these, the emblem of the serpent. Could we get a reader for this? Here's that same sculpture, by the way, in its full frieze. Quite an amazing frieze. Reader, please.
Rudy, can you read that for us, please?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
The serpent was a supreme type of the encircler and turner around. One of its names in Egyptian is Re, Ru, or Ru. Rare denotes the circuit to go around and make a circuit. This also was a symbol of the Old Mother, who bears its name as Rerit or Lelit, written with the L, the serpent woman Lilith of rabbinical tradition. Speaking under this type of Osirified deceased says, I pass through substances. I pierce the darkness. Hidden reptile is my name. The soul of my body is a serpent of life. From Natural Genesis.
Thank you. Okay. So you can see just in this dialogue, you know, it's the cycles of birth, life, and death that pass through substances and that pierce the darkness. Okay, as to MPH's reference to salt and acid or acidities. In alchemy, acidity is associated with fire. The principle of sulfur, which is the symbol for, the planet Mars, the metal iron, and the zodiacal sign Aries. The latter represented by the ram's head that ornamented MPH's sculpture of Isis. Acidity represents transformation, purification, illumination, strength, willpower, and courage. Salt, on the other hand, is associated with the element earth, the planet Saturn, the metal lead, and Capricorn. Saltness represents stability, solidity, structure, form, matter, endurance, patience, and discipline. Thus, in alchemy, acidity and saltiness represent soul and body. So when MPH says nature has power to free from acidity or saltness all corrosives and to overcome all impurities from terrestrial corruption adhering to bodies, he means that Isis as nature has the ability to free both the soul and the body from all the impurities associated with the substantive realms. The two elements, sulfur and salt, were part of the tria prima, or three primes of alchemy. The third prime being Mercury, which represents the spirit aspect. The three as one were represented by this symbol, which illustrates the union of spirit, soul, and body. Note that the horizontal line bisecting the circle is part of both the symbol for salt and for air. Okay, next up, the ram's head indicates that the most auspicious time for the generation of life is during the period when the sun passes through the sign of Aries. So more esoterically, Aries, as we know from DK, initiates all cyclic activity, impulsing each incarnation by means of the soul, represented by sulfur, which is associated with Mars, Aries' exoteric ruler, hence the exoteric incarnation, impulsed by Aries. It's interesting to note that Mercury, Aries' esoteric ruler, is also one of the three primes of alchemy. So Aries is very central to the alchemical belief system. Next, the serpents under her feet indicate that nature is inclined to preserve life and to heal disease by expelling impurities and corruption. Yes, this is the physical aspect, but more esoterically, the serpent, represents, well, it's represented by this statement, the soul of my body is a serpent of life. So there's the lesser serpent, right, which indicates the material aspect and the corruption aspect of the material. And then there's the serpent of life. I saw a hand.
Hey, I was just wondering, this is another name for the spirit of the earth, the planetary spirit.
You mean the serpent aspect, or?
Well, this one that nature, for another name for nature, the spirit of the
Yeah.
earth, the anima mundi.
Yeah, that is named for the whole aggregate of elemental life. That is it's the form principle, the elemental principle that animates the planet. Okay. So next up, we have this these axioms. In this sense, the axioms known to the ancient philosophers are verified, namely, nature contains nature. Nature rejoices in her own nature. Nature surmounts nature. Nature cannot be amended, but in her own nature. This quote comes from the Emerald Tablet, which we learned in a previous chapter is attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, who was said to be the founder of alchemy and the engraver of the Emerald Tablet. Interestingly, the specific wording of this quote identifies it to be a translation by Isaac Newton, depicted here in the middle. Somebody pasted a face over this statue, but it's Isaac Newton's face, who was himself an avid alchemist and who studied the Emerald Tablet extensively. The quote expresses the idea that nature, personified by Isis, is a self-contained, self-sustaining system, a unified whole that can only be transformed by following its own laws and patterns. Any thoughts about this? Any questions? Finally, therefore, in contemplating the statue of Isis, we must not lose sight of the occult sense of its allegories. Otherwise, the Virgin remains an inexplicable enigma. And now we've learned that the ancients didn't use idol ornamentation in their depictions of deity, but that in fact every element used in their art symbolized some layered philosophical concept, the highest and truest meanings of which was known only to the initiates of the priesthood of that time, since they're the ones that derive these symbols in the first place. Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please?
Martha, can you read that? Whoops, we lost Martha. Oh, there she is. Martha.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. A golden ring on her left arm, a line descends, to the end of which is suspended a deep box filled with flaming coals and incense. Isis, or nature personified, carries with her the sacred fire, religiously preserved and kept burning in a special temple by the Vestal Virgins. This fire is the genuine immortal flame of nature, ethereal, essential, the author of life. The inconsumable oil, the balm of life, so much praised by the wise and so often referred to in the scriptures. I think that was the balsam of life. So much praised by the wise and so often referred to in the scriptures is frequently symbolized as the fuel of this immortal flame. From the right arm of the figure also descends a thread, to the end of which is fastened a pair of scales, to denote the exactitude of nature in her weights and measures. Isis is often represented as the symbol of justice because nature is eternally consistent.
Thank you, Martha. Okay, first, from a golden ring on her left arm, a line descends, to the end of which is suspended a deep box filled with flaming coals and incense. Isis, or nature personified, carries with her the sacred fire, religiously preserved and kept burning in a special temple by the Vestal Virgins. Okay, the Vestal Virgins were an order of priestesses of Vesta, the Roman goddess of the hearth, home, and family, whose main duty was to maintain the sacred fire in the temple of Vesta, first established during the 7th century BC. Since the sculpture of Isis that MPH references throughout this passage is almost certainly Roman, it makes sense that it would include a reference to this order, which Isis would have overseen. These priestesses would have looked to Isis as the source of their spirituality. Let's see if there's anything else in this. Okay, and finally, from the right arm of the figure also distends a thread to the end of which is fastened a pair of scales to denote the exactitude of nature in her weights and measures. Isis is often represented as the symbol of justice because nature is eternally consistent. So here we have a reference to yet another aspect of Isis, the Libran goddess of justice, which has its origins in the Egyptian Ma'at, who symbolized cosmic order, harmony, and truth. She is famously depicted weighing the hearts of the dead against a feather of truth for the afterlife to determine the nature of one's afterlife. You can see here at the center point, just here atop the scales. In ancient Greece, Ma'at became the goddess Themis, considered to embody divine order, law, and custom, and was the mother of the fates who controlled human destiny. Okay, any questions so far? Any thoughts about anything?
Francis?
Yeah.
Magda says that the Vestal Temple was founded by Numa Pompilio, the initiate and second king of Rome.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
And I just wanted to point out, last time we explored what DK said about Mary and Isis and Eve. Okay, well, there is an astrologer, Demetria George, and she did she's got a book on the goddesses, and basically she has a mandala where she sets them up as aids to Venus.
As what?
And
say that again.
aids, as aids, as
okay.
Venus's helper. They're related to the work that Venus does, the right human relations. Vesta, the Vestal Virgin there at the 12th house, the cusp of the ascendant, the sacred fires that we set up, Ceres, the mother goddess there at the 4th house of home and heritage, Juno, the mother, I'm sorry, the wife, the equal to Jupiter with her own power there at the 7th house, and Pallas Athena at the cusp of the 10th house with her wisdom.
Mhm.
And I thought that, that always stuck with me when I read that.
Yeah.
I forget, I'm sorry, I forget the name of the book. I've got it somewhere on my shelf, but I have lots of books on my shelf. But anyway, that always stuck with me, and it seems to fit very well in with all of the different analogies that you're bringing out in here and that we've talked about over this. Okay, Maria wants to know what the name of the book is. I'll have to find it. I think it's called Asteroid Goddesses by Demetria George, but I'll look that up
Yeah.
and I'll give it to you because it's quite fascinating. And these are, of course, the big asteroids that are out there in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And Ceres has now become her own little dwarf planet, so which is equal in stature to Pluto since they demoted him. So anyway, it all fits in with the big picture that we're talking about and the importance of these things, both in the chart as they're described on those house cusps and in the work here of Isis and Venus.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just
Yeah,
wanted to
well,
bring that
I like
in.
that idea of, we're talking astrology, everybody, that, that these feminine goddesses who are all aspects of Isis, they represented certain qualities and focused in on those qualities, such as, the, this asteroid Vesta, of course, the goddess came first, right? We didn't discover the asteroid until this century or maybe the last in some cases, like Ceres. But that you can now chart the influence of these aspects of Isis, which in astrology could be considered as aspects of the planet Venus. You can really pinpoint those aspects in your astrological chart and the changing, shifting uh, movement and qualities of those aspects. Thanks for that, BL. That's quite interesting. Okay, let's get back to where we were. Okay, so before we, anybody else have any thoughts about that before we go on? Okay, so before we turn to the next page in the book, let's take a look at the two images.
Hold
Yeah.
on, sorry. Eleanor says she also represents the females, the Hermetic tarot. Females in, I think I'm missing some here, there, sorry. The females in the Hermetic tarot.
The females in the Hermetic, what?
Tarot.
Let me.
Tarot cards.
Tarot cards. Oh, sure. Right. Yeah. In fact, I'm going to be bringing up Isis's close relation to the High Priestess, which is the second, of course, the second tarot card. But you're right. I think you can go right through the tarot deck and find these aspects of Isis in those feminine energy fields that the tarot represents. Okay, so we're going to be taking a look at these two images, which are both from Lenoir's La Franche Maçonnerie. First image is called Thoth the Dog-Headed. And could we get a reader, please?
And Veronica, can you read that for us, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Okay. Aroeris or Thoth was one of the five immortals protected the infant Horus from the wrath of Typhon after the murder of Osiris. He also revised the ancient Egyptian calendar by increasing the year from 360 days to 365. Thoth Hermes was called the dog-headed because of his faithfulness and integrity. He shone crowned with the solar nimbus carrying in one hand the crux and Sata, the symbol of eternal life, in the other a serpent wound staff, symbolic of his dignity as counselor of the gods.
Thank you.
They're all talking about Kundalini here.
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Whenever
the
you see,
fires.
whenever you see this staff, you know, you're looking at some aspect of Kundalini. It's a good point.
And before, when the goddess that her name was the Serpent, it was like talking about Ida and Pigala, those three fires, actually.
Right, the Sushumna, the Ida, Pingala.
Yes.
Yeah, indeed. It's so true. There is a close association because Kundalini is the form aspect. It's actually the rising of the fires of form, and all the goddesses represent those fires, the fires of form, in all their many faces. Okay, my opinion is a pretty crude image, really. I much prefer the traditional Egyptian depictions of Thoth. In fact, the only connection between Thoth and the jackal or dog that I could find comes to the fact that, like Thoth, the jackal is associated with the office of the scribe. You know, here we have a scribe worshiping Anubis, and Thoth is often seen as the scribe, but the jackal Thoth is more frequently linked with the ibis, as shown here, or the baboon, both lunar symbols. It is Anubis rather than Thoth that is associated with the jackal. Here he is shown assisting in the weighing of the heart of the deceased, along with Thoth, whose presence is indicated by the small baboon up here, shown in detail over here, atop the scales. Okay, back to the illustration. There's no definitive group of quote unquote 5 immortal gods, though we might speculate that in addition to Thoth, Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Set would be candidates for that group. Actually, MPH might be referring to those gods whose birthdays are celebrated at the end of the ancient Egyptian calendar year, which was extended from 360 to 365 days in order to honor the birthdays of Osiris, Isis, Horus, Set, and Nephthys. These additional festival days were called the 5 Epagomene, Apago or Apagio Mene. And Veronica, how do you pronounce that? Apagomene. Do you know how to pronounce that?
I've got to see it in English, please.
Okay, let me paste it on here.
Sorry, I can't see the equivalent of the Greek to tell you the name.
Oh, okay.
Epagomeni, maybe.
Apagomene, maybe, yeah. Would the G be hard, do you think?
I'm not sure. I won't say it's something that I know for sure, so I can't say.
Yeah, okay. I thought it might be a Greek, of Greek origin. Okay, let's get back out here. Alrighty. Okay, the other image on page 47. Anyway, the upshot of this is that these 5 gods were that he's, saying that Thoth is part of are probably the 5 that were added to the calendar year as described here, right? Of course, coinciding with that would be that the astronomers of the time recognized that the turn around the sun was actually, because the Egyptians very early on realized that the sun was at the center of our solar system, and unlike much later where that information was lost in early European civilization, right? But there's a number of writings that indicate that the Egyptians knew full well, that the earth revolved around the sun. And so they would, especially because of certain astronomical data associated with the pyramid, they would have certainly known that the length of the year was 365 days, not 360. And coinciding with this was these adding of these festival days, these 5 festival days to honor these 5 gods. Okay, so the other picture is here. It's entitled The Egyptian Madonna. Could we get a reader, please?
Anne Parker, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. Isis is shown with her son Horus in her arms. She is crowned with the lunar orb, ornamented with the horns of rams or bulls. Horus, or Horus, as he is more generally known, was the son of Isis and Osiris. He was the god of time, hours, days, and this narrow span of life recognized as mortal existence. In all probability, the 4 sons of Horus represent the 4 kingdoms of nature. It was Horus who finally avenged the murder of his father, Osiris, by slaying Typhon, the spirit of evil.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, this illustration is taken from one of the many Egyptian statuettes that have the same theme, all showing a suckling Horus already crowned, suggesting that he and his status as deity were intrinsic, it was one and the same thing. And that's what they're indicating by having him crowned even as a infant. It's possible, even likely, and this addresses what Maria brought up, that this concept was borrowed by the fathers of Christianity for their depictions of Mary and a suckling baby Jesus, because all the concepts are the same in both. Horus was the Son of God, right? He was the solar aspect, the second principle, as was Jesus, the avatar of the Christ, right? And Mary represents the form aspect, as did Isis. Okay. Ancient Egypt flourished during the age of Taurus, which Isis's headdress, see, we're looking back here at this symbol, right? Which is taken from these. You can see these headdresses, which were often found, especially in later images of Isis. So, these headdresses seem to reflect the fact that she came into her own during the age of Taurus. Since the moon is exalted in Taurus, and the animal universally associated with Isis is the bull. So there's a strong connection between Taurus and Isis through that. At any rate, Isis is the lunar counterpart with all that represents to her solar brother/husband, Osiris. MPH describes Horus as the god of time, but the Egyptian god more commonly associated with this role was Khonsu, who MPH might have confused with Horus because they are both falcon-headed and both have the solar orb as their headdress, but the difference in their depictions is found in Khonsu's headdress, in which the crescent moon cradles the solar orb, suggesting that time only comes into being during manifestation and that he is a god of that aspect, of the time aspect, passage of time. Whereas Horus would ultimately transcend the realm of time. Okay, and moving on, there's 2 instances of the quote, 4 sons of Horus. The first are linked with regions of Egypt, corners of the cosmos, and the cardinal directions. The second use of the term sons of Horus you can find in the 4 canopic jars that house the organs removed from the body during mummification, which were given lids that represented the heads of the sons of Taurus. Just why that was so, you'd have to talk to an ancient Egyptian priest. Figure that one out. Okay, so back to,
Francis.
yeah.
Anne Veronica says, if the name is Greek, empagimene means to derive, induction,
Induction would fit.
to induce,
And
to
that
derive.
Well, interesting.
Right? Is that what you mean, Anne Veronica?
Yes, I searched on it. We use this word in Greek, but if it is a Greek word, that it means this thing, that we deduce something.
Interesting. Well, that you could see that might fit, with the addition of the 5 birthdays of the gods at the end of the year, because it's a kind of induction. But who knows for sure.
And then Magda says the Greek impagmenoi means brought in or added on.
Well, that's closer. That's interesting. Yeah, that seems to
They're
be.
spelled a little different. The
Yeah,
2
well, that's
words,
not
the one that, right.
It could also mean the one that comes in,
Yeah, that would
the
work.
next in line.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. That's the kind of thing you'd say about a god, the one that comes in. And since it's a plural, obviously, then the 5 that come in at the end of the year. Yeah, that's probably it. That along those lines anyway. Okay, can we get a reader, please? Let's see here. Wait a minute. Okay, so back to the text, beginning on page 48 in the folio edition. So we just top of the new page. Can we get a reader, please?
Kirsten, can you read that for us, please? I see you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Do you have a local mute?
Yes, I have. The World Virgin is sometimes shown standing between 2 great pillars, the Jachin and Boaz of Freemasonry, symbolizing the fact that nature attains productivity by means of polarity. As wisdom personified, Isis stands between the pillars of opposites, demonstrating that understanding is always found at the point of equilibrium, and that truth is often crucified between the 2 thieves of apparent contradiction.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've seen a couple of things in here. I didn't see the first. Very important that nature attains productivity by means of polarity. right? That's why she's, she's the goddess of this productivity in nature. That's why you had the cornucopia associated with her, right? And I like this other line too. It says that the truth is often crucified between the two thieves of apparent contradiction, meaning that that unity of perception, we could think of it as the intuition, is hidden by the pairs of opposites, right? Okay, so though I could find no ancient imagery of Isis standing or sitting between two pillars, that doesn't mean that there wasn't an image somewhere, but I couldn't find anything. But never mind, the second arcanum of the Tarot, called the High Priestess, is considered by many to represent Isis, and almost certainly does. If you just look at the symbolism. In addition to the dual horns and the lunar orb of the headdress, which is the same as Isis, note also that this figure's robe represents the source of the waters that represent all manifestation. Her pillars her position between the pillars Jachin and Boaz represent the balance and harmony between all opposites, all pairs of opposites, and all opposing forces. We get back to this idea that the truth is often crucified between the two thieves of apparent contradiction. And so she's representing the truth between these extremities, right? Interesting that the cross too represents that quote unquote crucifixion, right? Between the pairs of opposites. Okay, let's see here. So her position.
Magda,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry. Magda says, could the two pillars of Freemasonry equal the two sinners hanging from the cross to the left and right of Jesus Christ, and maybe also Lucifer and Ahriman or Satan?
Yes, they could. In the same way, it's a triplicity, with the true way being the middle path between the two. And you could take that symbolism, I think, pretty far in terms of the connection between this symbol and the crucifixion, the unrepentant and the repentant, right? But then the true way, the negative, the unrepentant, and the positive, the repentant, but then the true way lies between that pairs. You could also call it, the angel of the presence and the dweller on the threshold would be another representation. Anyone else? Thoughts? Yeah, I'm looking at your post now. Okay, so her position between the pillars Jachin and Boaz represent the balance and harmony between all opposites and all opposing forces, including spirit and form, birth and death, inner and outer life, and clockwise versus counterclockwise motion. For instance, when we reverse ourselves on the wheel of life and move in a clockwise motion. But ultimately, it's the central path between those two where we break out of any passage, as Hercules did when he finally finished the labors and graduated to a place beyond the 12 signs. That would represent also the middle path. In astrology, this point of equilibrium is symbolized by the scales of Libra. Could we get a reader for this, please? Say, excerpt from Paul Foster Case's The Tarot. Bial?
I'm sorry. I wanted Karen to read, but first Maria has the cross arms could also represent peace. She's got a question mark there. And she says in the previous image,
Also represent what?
peace,
Peace?
as in, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, peace and equilibrium are similar terms. You know, equilibrium is a more esoteric definition of peace, or a more philosophical definition, where you have a balance between opposing forces. Therefore, you have peace, right? So, yes. Okay, reader.
Okay, Karen, please.
The title High Priestess means literally chief feminine elder or primary receptive aspect of the life power. In Hindu philosophy, this is Prakriti, the pre-cosmic root substance, which is the substratum beneath all the objective planes of existence. Thus, the woman in Key 2 is in one sense identical with first mother or first matter of the alchemists, who often call this prima materia their virgin Diana. Diana is the goddess of the crescent moon. She is also the great Hecate of Greek occult philosophy. Hecate, often confused in ancient mythology with Luna, was supposed to have all secret powers of nature at her command. In fact, the high priestess corresponds to all the virgin goddesses of the ancient world, to Artemis, guardian and helper of childbirth, to Maya, mother of Hermes, to Bonadea, who out of modesty never left her bower or let herself be seen of men, and to Kybele, whose sanctuaries were caves. Dr. Waite says she is the spiritual bride and mother, the daughter of the stars, the queen of the borrowed light, but this is the light of all. Thus she also represents Eve before her union with Adam.
Thank you. Okay, any questions, any thoughts about this? So, you know, in the Arcanum, you have these two fundamentals that are introduced: the magician, the male aspect, through the number one. I once gave a presentation where I suggested that it actually, instead of Mercury, represents Vulcan, but of course Mercury veils Vulcan. And then the second principle of the goddess aspect, and the two together, that first and second arcanum, the magician and the high priestess, together formulate all the rest of the arcanum. You can see some combination of these fundamental energies are then represented by the arcanum that follow. Something like what Biel was suggesting when she was talking about these goddesses who are represented by asteroids in astrology, and how they're all aspects of Isis, Venus, or the high priestess, right? Which are all the same thing. Okay. Any other thoughts on this? It's a fascinating topic. Much deeper understanding of the Tarot is gained with through that kind of understanding. Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please?
Yes, Tia, can you read that? And I just want to let you know my internet is blinking on and off. So if you say something to me and I don't respond right away, give me a second. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So Tia,
Yes. The sheen of gold in her dark hair indicates that
can you
while she is
please read that?
What?
the sheen of gold in her dark hair indicates that while she is lunar, her power is due to the sun's rays, from which she secures her ruddy complexion. As the moon is robed in the reflected light of the sun, so Isis, like the Virgin of Revelation, is clothed in the glory of solar luminosity. Apuleius states that while he was sleeping, he beheld the venerable goddess Isis rising out of the ocean. The ancients realized that the primary forms of life came first out of water, and modern science concurs in this view. H.G. Wells, in his Outline of History, describing primitive life on the earth, states, "But though the ocean and intertidal water already swarmed with life, the land above the high tide line was still, so far as we can guess, a stony wilderness without a trace of life." In the next chapter, he adds, "Wherever the shoreline ran, there was life, and that life went on in and by and with water as its home, its medium, and its fundamental necessity." The ancients believed that the universal sperm proceeded from warm vapor, humid but fiery. The veiled Isis, whose very coverings represent vapor, is symbolic of this humidity, which is the carrier or vehicle for the sperm life of the sun, represented by a child in her arms. Because the sun, moon, and stars in setting appear to sink into the sea, and also because the water receives their rays into itself, the sea was believed to be the breeding ground for the sperm of living things. This sperm is generated from the combination of the influences of the celestial bodies. Hence, Isis is sometimes represented as pregnant.
Okay, thank you. So first, the sheen of gold in her dark hair indicates that while she is lunar, her power is due to the sun's rays from which she secures her ruddy complexion. As the moon is robed in the reflected light of the sun, so Isis, like the Virgin of Revelation, is clothed in the glory of solar luminosity. So for me, this sheen of solar luminosity is best represented by this frieze, depicting a golden hued Isis. The Virgin of Revelation from the book of
Francis?
Revelation. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Marguerite referenced the previous image, says in the Kabbalah, this card represents the path from the previous one, from Kether to Tiphereth.
This
The
one?
tarot number 2. No, tarot number 2. There you go. This card represents the path from Kether to Tiphereth, the longest path to tread. Did I get that right, Marguerite?
Yes. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that introduces a really fascinating but complex subject, which is the paths between the Sephiroth, or Sephirah, I should say, and that those are assigned to row. Those paths are each qualified by the energy of one of the major arcanum, which is really fascinating, but it takes a deep study even just to get into the framework that would allow you to understand. So tell me again the two Sephirah that she is the path between.
It's Keter and Tiferet. It's from the top of the tree to the center, and Tiferet being the heart of the tree. It's the
Right.
Sephirah of healing and harmony.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's it is a fascinating study, those paths and their connection to the tarot. Okay. Okay, the Virgin of Revelation from the book of Revelation is described as being clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. So almost certainly the 12 constellations of the zodiac, which esoterically represent the redemption of matter, indicated by the fact that the Virgin stands on the crescent moon. Therefore, it's a symbol of transcendence. The Virgin of Revelation represents the link between the unmanifest, symbolized by her crown of stars, and the form aspect, symbolized by the lunar disk, or said another way, that source of spirit through the stars, that animating life aspect that Isis embodies in whatever framework you're looking at. In our solar system, she would then be, quote unquote, impregnated by these 12 influences and demonstrate through the form aspect those influences. Next up, Apuleius states that while he was sleeping, he beheld the venerable goddess Isis rising out of the ocean. The ancients realized that the primary forms of life first came out of water, and modern science concurs in this view. So the goddess Isis rising out of the ocean is most famously represented by Sandro Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, mirroring the scientific theory that life emerged from the waters. Is the philosophical tenet that manifested life, or Mula Prakriti, emerges from the great deep or the waters of space. So, the oceans of the earth, of which, like in this depiction, Isis/Venus emerged from, is a metaphor for the emergence of the animating life aspect from the depths of space. So next up, we got a quote from H.G. Wells' Outline of History, which is shown here, handsome couple of volumes, which corroborates the idea that life emerged from Earth's oceans. At least, this is the scientific point of view, and it's parallels to philosophy. Next, the ancients believed that the universal sperm proceeded from warm vapor, humid but fiery. So universal sperm is synonymous with the prima materia of alchemy, which contains the seed or noumenal matrix of all form life. Okay, do you get that? So whenever you see this idea of universal sperm, spermatozoa, it is a metaphor for this, the unseen seed or noumenal matrix of form life. The term warm vapor, humid but fiery, refers to a specific alchemical process considered to be the key to transformation, for it is by means of humid but fiery vapor that metals and minerals can be dissolved and coagulated, and is thus an essential step in producing the philosopher's stone. All this is a metaphor for purification and transformation of one's own substantive aspects, of one's own sheaths. Okay, next up, the veiled Isis, whose very covering represents vapor, is symbolic of this humidity, which is the carrier or vehicle for the sperm life of the sun, represented by a child in her arms. Here's a bronze of the Egyptian Holy Trinity, representing the, quote, sperm life of the sun in the form of Osiris, the principle of humidity represented by Isis, and the quote, vehicle for the sperm life of the sun in the form of the infant Horus. And here we have Nicholas Rorick's Veiled Mother of the World, painted in 1937. Note the waters, the quote, principle of humidity present both on Earth and in space, in which float little causal deities, or they're almost like cosmic spermatozoids, zoa. They're the creative agencies. And finally, because the sun, moon, and stars in setting appear to sink into the sea, and also because the water receives their rays into itself, the sea was believed to be the breeding ground for the sperm of living things. In Mesopotamian mythology, the sea was personified by the goddess Tiamat, who, like Isis, was the primordial mother of all gods and creatures. As such, Tiamat is also a symbol of the universal sperm, or the first matter. Actually, the receiver of that unseen universal sperm, which is then germinates in the ocean of life. This is symbolized by the esoteric ruler of Virgo, where you have that sperm of the universal life in the form of Vulcan being veiled by the moon, which is the receptor of that. And the product, of course, is the Christ child. Finally, this sperm is generated from the combination of the influences of the celestial bodies. Hence, Isis is sometimes represented as pregnant. This refers to the myriads of energetic ray influences from the planets, stars, and constellations, which, quote unquote, impregnate or influence the form aspect of our solar system, which Isis represents. The form aspect is Isis. Any thoughts about this? Any questions? Alrighty. Next up, could we get a reader, please?
Marguerite, can you read that for us? But first, Magda says, from Kether to Tiferet, passing through Dot, synthesis, I'm sorry if I'm murdering these names, synthesis of all 10 Sephirots, the one receiving and concealing divine light, the mystical state.
Okay, I'd need to look at a tree of life and those paths in order to really understand what you're saying, Magda. It's an amazing study. It'd be great to do a webinar series, and just each webinar take one Sephiroth, and then another webinar take a path between two Sephiroth as a study. It really would be enlightening. Thanks for that. Yes.
Before I read, I didn't write it down, but Paul Foster Case was a great adept of the Western tradition, the Golden Dawn.
Right.
And in Golden Dawn, the paths that I had mentioned would be exactly what he studied and what he would espouse. But it comes from the Golden Dawn tradition. And the
that's why I've always used Paul Foster Case is my go-to source for tarot information, because there's other great sources really, but he really does hit the nail on the head in his understanding. Thanks for that. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
About the Golden Dawn.
Okay. All right. Frequently, the statue of Isis was accompanied by the figure of a large black and white ox. The ox represents either Osiris as Taurus, the bull of the zodiac, or Apis as animal sacred to Osiris because of its particular markings and colorings. Among the Egyptians, the bull was a beast of burden. Hence, the presence of the animal was a reminder of the labors patiently performed by nature, that all creatures may have life and health. Hippocrates, the god of silence, holding his finger to his mouth, often accompanies this statue of Isis. He warns all to keep secrets of the wise from those unfit to know them. The Druids of Britain and Gaul had a deep knowledge concerning the mysteries of Isis and worshipped her under the symbol of the moon. Godfrey Higgins considered it a mistake to regard Isis as synonymous with the moon. The moon was chosen for Isis because of its dominion over water. The Druids considered the sun to be the father and the moon, the mother of all things. By means of these symbols, they worshipped universal nature.
Thank you. Okay, first, frequently the
Francis.
statue, yeah,
Sorry, before you go on, you've got a couple of comments here and I just wanted to
right.
read them. Tia says it would be interesting to ponder how deeply entrenched these archetypes and images are tied to previous ages. Perhaps we will see a major shift in how we concretize our understanding of deity in the new age with the incoming fourth race souls and the emerging group consciousness.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it's, well, in a lot of ways, that's what we're doing with this webinar series. We're looking at all the ways that deity has been represented over the ages, from all through all these lenses. If you go back through these webinar series, that's what you'll find is these descriptions of certain philosophical concepts which are embodied by some deity, and then how they were portrayed in different cultures. And taken together, you really do start to get some deeper insight, right? I think the Egyptian is especially important because it was causal to a lot of the cultures that we have studied so far. It's the Greeks took much from the Egyptians, as did other cultures that we've studied.
And then Martha says it's astonishing the parallelism between the myth of Isis, Christianity, and tarot. Remembering that in ancient times, information was built upon oral history, we take in so much about the universal human story.
Well said. Exactly. Anyone else?
Yes.
Good thoughts. Yeah.
Magda says, yes, parallelism are astonishing. For instance, Isis is Mary Magdalene, Hathor, and the house of Horus, son of the sun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we all have certain cultural methods of portraying these philosophical ideas resonate with us. And it could be from a previous incarnation, in that culture, or just that our ray makeup, makes us predisposed to hear that form of the metaphor, So it really is useful to explore, a number of cultures, because you get deeper and deeper insight based on the variety of approaches. Okay. Anyone else? Good stuff. Thank you. Okay, so first, frequently the statue of Isis was accompanied by the figure of a large black and white ox. The ox represents either Osiris as Taurus, the bull of the zodiac, or Apis, an animal sacred to Osiris because of its peculiar markings, and colorings. So beginning at least as far back as the age of Taurus, calves that had a certain set of black and white markings were recognized as incarnations of the god Apis, or Apis, considered to be the son of Hathor, the maternal aspect of Isis. The required markings were incredibly specific in order, we might assume, to cut out any possibility of randomness and thus guarantee that the calf was a true incarnation of Apis. These required markings included a white triangle on its forehead, a white Egyptian vulture wing outlined on its back, a scarab mark under its tongue, a white crescent moon shape on its right flank, and double hairs on his tail, whatever double hairs represents. Maybe hairs going in opposite directions or something. So because of these exacting requirements, there could be no question as to the identity of the calf as a divine incarnation. If you had a calf that had all of those, you would know that it had been designed to be the incarnation of this god Apis, which is an aspect of both of Taurus and Isis. When the Apis bull died, a search was made among newborn calves for the new incarnation, much like the process used to discover the rebirth of Tibetan tulkus. It's interesting. Something I didn't know. Okay, next up, Harpocrates, the god of silence, holding his finger to his mouth, often accompanies the statue of Isis. He warns all to keep the secrets of the wise from those unfit to know them. I mentioned Harpocrates, known in Egypt as Horpakhared earlier. He is Horus in his youth and was considered to be both oracle and protector of the mysteries. However, the raised finger, long believed to be a request for silence, is actually a hand gesture or symbol that signifies youth. And so it was long thought to be that he was he was warning us to be silent, but in fact, it's just a symbol for youth, that raising of the finger. And if you look closely, you can see that it's not, he doesn't really have it across his pursed lips, but it just touches his lower lip. And that was the symbol for youth. Interesting. That doesn't make him any less to be oracular or protector of the mysteries, but this myth about him compelling us to be silent was just that. It was a misunderstanding of the symbol. Next, the Druids of Britain and Gaul had a deep knowledge concerning the mysteries of Isis and worshipped her under the symbol of the moon. This is a purely speculative comment based on the presence of shrines and temples dedicated to Isis throughout the areas controlled by the Druids. But because the Druids forbade all writings about their mysteries, all we have is this archaeological evidence. We don't have any written words that say that concerning the quote unquote mysteries of Isis in Gaul. This said, Isis and the Celtic goddess Brigid had many similar attributes. Both were fertility goddesses associated with cows, and both were protectors healers and magicians. My opinion is that Bridget would have fallen under the umbrella of Isis rather than being co-equal to her in terms of the scope of her influence. I see also a Vesta orientation because she was always connected with the hearth and the home fires, but she had a magical component as well. And finally, Godfrey Higgins considered it a mistake to regard Isis as synonymous with the moon. The moon was chosen for Isis because of its dominion over water. The Druids considered the sun to be the father and the moon the mother of all things. By means of these symbols, they worshipped universal nature. So Isis's dominion includes all manifestation. Thus, all the strictly lunar gods and goddesses, such as Khonsu in Egypt, Selene in Greece, shown here, and Rhiannon for the Celts, are lesser aspects of Isis. It doesn't depict the full nature of her purview. The Druid idea of father, son, or Belenus and mother moon fits closely with Osiris and Isis. Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please?
Maria, can you read that for us, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
The figure of Isis is sometimes used to represent the occult and magical arts, such as necromancy, evocation, sorcery, and thaumaturgy. I'm not sure if I said that well, right. In one of the myths concerning her, Isis is said to have conjured the invincible god of eternities, Ra, to tell her his secret and sacred name, which he did. This name is equivalent to the lost word of Masonry. By means of this word, a magician can demand obedience from the invisible and superior deities. The priests of Isis become adepts in the use of the unseen forces of nature. They understood hypnotism, mesmerism, and similar practices long before the modern world dreamed of their existence. Plutarch describes the requisites of a follower of Isis in this manner, for as 'tis not the length of the bird or the coarseness of the habit which makes a philosopher, so neither will those frequent shavings or the mere wearing of a linen vestment constitutes a votary of Isis, but he alone is true servant or follower of this goddess, who after he has heard and been made acquainted in the proper manner with the history of the actions of these gods, searches into the hidden truth which he concealed under them, and examines the all by the dictates of reason and philosophy.
Thank you. Okay, first up, the figure of Isis is sometimes used to represent the occult and magical arts, such as necromancy, invocation, sorcery, and thaumaturgy. Isis's magical ability is rooted in and first demonstrated by her act of reconstructing Osiris's 13 body parts and then fashioning the 14th part, the phallus, in such a way that brought Isis back to life. Isis was a master of spells and charms, which she used as protection, healing, and to control the elements. She taught these magical arts to her son Horus, as well as to her priests and those who worshipped her. Next. In one of the myths concerning her, Isis is said to have conjured the invisible god of eternities, Ra, to tell her his secret and sacred name, which he did. This name is equivalent to the lost word of masonry. By means of this word, a magician can demand obedience from the invisible and superior deities. The story goes that Isis learned the name of Ra by creating a venomous snake from Ra's saliva and placing it on Ra's path. When Ra was bitten by the snake, he suffered great pain and asked for Isis's help. Isis agreed to heal him only if he revealed his true name to her. Ra reluctantly agreed, and Isis learned his name, which gave her access to his great power and authority. So, this really shows just how broad Isis's purview is. She can even incorporate those highest aspects of magic within her form. In other words, through nature, one can even learn the name of the highest, the name of the ultimate God, which Ra represented. Like Ra was like the grandfather of Osiris, I believe, right? So this was really the ultimate solar god. And through nature, remember that poem on nature, one can arrive at even the name of these high deities. Next up, the priests of Isis became adepts in the use of the unseen forces of nature. They understood hypnotism, mesmerism, and similar practices long before the modern world dreamed of their existence. So the magical abilities of the priesthood of Isis was truly legendary. For example, they were renowned for their ability to communicate with the dead and perform rituals of resurrection. This makes sense because Isis represents the entire cycle of birth, life, and death. So if you master the arts that Isis represents, you would be able to communicate with the dead, to extend your consciousness beyond just the land of the living. They used herbs, stones, metals, and animal parts to create very effective, renowned, really, potions and talismans and figurines. Very powerful during their heyday. And finally, we have a quote from Plutarch describing the true nature of a priest of Isis as one who examines the hidden truths by using the dictates of reason and philosophy. Okay, any thoughts or questions? Not anything so far? All right, this takes us up to the final paragraph of this section on specifically on Isis. Could we get a reader, please?
Eleonora, can you read that for us, please? Eleonora? Well, I don't see her unmuting, so let me go ahead and read it.
Okay.
You can hear me, right?
Yes.
During the Middle Ages, the troubadours of Central Europe preserved in song the legends of this Egyptian goddess. They composed sonnets to the most beautiful woman in the world, though few ever discovered her identity. She was Sophia, the Virgin of Wisdom, whom all the philosophers of the world have wooed. Isis represents the mystery of motherhood. which the ancients recognized as the most apparent proof of nature's omniscient wisdom and God's overshadowing power. To the modern seeker, she is the epitome of the Greek unknown, and only those who unveil her will be able to solve the mysteries of life, death, generation, and regeneration.
Thank you, BL. Okay, so first, during the Middle Ages, the troubadours of Central Europe preserved in song the legends of the Egyptian goddess. They composed sonnets to the most beautiful woman in all the world. Though few ever discovered her identity, she was Sophia, the Virgin of Wisdom, whom all the philosophers of the world have wooed. Here are the lyrics to a song by the troubadour Rimbaud de Vaquera, written for Beatrice of Savoy, renowned beauty, as an embodiment of Venus/Sophia. So can we get a reader for this, please?
Yvonne, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. Now has come the cold season when I can cast off my grief, for never again can it avail me, the fair weather or the colors or the coolness or the warmth, for never again can it avail me, the fair lady who took me from myself. Venus, who with all colors makes the world bright and serene and gives joy and worth to men and to women, is not at all of her worth, that her mortal body sustains her, but never again can she hold it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And finally, we have a commentary on Sophia from De Perucker's The Fountain Source of Wisdom, and we'll close with this. Could we get a reader, please?
Vivian, can you read that for us, please?
In this treatise on Isis and Osiris, Plutarch, the ancient Greek philosopher, biographer, and initiate, at one time priest of the Delphic Apollo, tells us that over the portal of the Temple of Isis in Egypt, the following mystical words were engraven in everlasting stone. Isis am I, all that was, all that is, all that ever will be, and no one of mortals have ever discovered my garment. As will be noticed, our rendering of this famous inscription differs somewhat from the one usually given, and no mortal has ever lifted my veil. This is an important difference because it introduces a new significance to the meaning of the Greek phrase, rarely more close to the deep esoteric sense of this majestic declaration. It is noteworthy that Plutarch ends this inscription after the words, discovered my garment, whereas Proclus, the well-known Neoplatonic philosopher, says that it also contained the further words, the fruit that I brought forth became the sun. There are two explanations of this statement. The first is that the eternal wisdom, or Sophia, which has always been, now is, and always will be, is the virgin mother of initiates, a mother always fertile, always bringing forth a constant, uninterrupted series of Buddha-like men. This is the ancient wisdom, a wisdom ever enduring, a representation in human terms of the operation, structure, and very nature of the universe. Divine, spiritual, astral, and physical. Such was the mystic Isis.
Thank you, Vivian. Okay. You know what? We're just a couple of minutes away from this whole section, so I'm going to finish it up real quick. So Isis represents the mystery of motherhood, which the ancients recognized as the most apparent proof of nature's omniscient wisdom and God's overshadowing power. So the mystery of motherhood is the mystery of incarnation, the phohatic merging of the life aspect into the triple form world. This is proof of nature's omniscience, because this merging of spirit and matter is directed by and an agency of the plan. And next, finally, to the modern seeker, she is the epitome of the great unknown, and only those who unveil her will be able to solve the mysteries of life, death, generation, and regeneration. Unveiling Isis is synonymous with becoming an adept on causal levels. Thus, these mysteries of life, death, and generations are secrets of, I would imagine, a very high level of initiation. And that takes us to the final subsection of this chapter, called Mummification of the Egyptian Dead, which we will move into at our next session. So thank you all for attending, appreciate it, and for your chat comments and for raising your hand. It's always interesting when people contribute, so appreciation. And could we have dates for next time?
Sure. The next webinar is TCF, which will be on 8 September. Then
That's just this Friday.
Right. And then we'll have the Secret Doctrine 2 Sundays from now on the 17th of September. And then we'll have the next Secret Teaching of All Ages, where we start with mummification on the 1st of October.
Oh, good to know. Okay, thank you all. Much appreciated, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Blessings.